to the Effortless English Show. Today's guest is Blaine Ray, the developer of TPRS system of teaching language through storytelling. We'll talk to him more about the details of using stories to improve your English. When I first used a story to teach English was in Japan, and I was teaching a group of university students, about 50 students in the class. I was standing up in front of the class, and they had their usual bored looks on their faces. They were bored and tired, and I thought, this time I'm going to do something different. I had been reading about using stories to teach English, and I had read Blaine's book. So instead of doing my usual lecture, I started to tell a story. And I told this crazy story about a baby with a samurai sword, and it was running around and fighting monsters and eating ice cream. And as I told the story, I drew pictures on the blackboard. I drew a picture of a big baby with a sword. And as I was telling the story, I got really excited. I was running back and forth and doing all kinds of strange voices. And I can remember at one point turning and looking back at the class. Now, usually, when I looked at my class in Japan of university students, they looked like this. I would be lecturing them in a normal class. Their heads would be kind of down. They would be writing notes. They all looked half dead, half asleep. But this time, as I was telling this crazy story, they were all looking at me with huge eyes. They looked shocked. They looked surprised. They looked amused. They didn't know what was happening really, or why I was doing this. But the main thing is, and the most important thing to me, they looked interested. They were extremely interested in what was happening. Instead of being bored, all of their concentration, all of their focus was on me, and more importantly, on English, on what I was saying, on understanding the story. Now, at that time, I was not using the actual techniques of TPRS, which Blaine may talk about, but just by telling a story instead of lecturing about grammar and vocabulary was enough to hold their interest. Every student in the class was focused, was listening, and was understanding. And that event is what really sold me, what told me that storytelling was a very powerful way to teach English, and for the students, a very powerful way for them to learn English. Now, my first guest, Blaine Ray, developed TPRS as a means of teaching language. He is a fantastic language teacher. Now, I'm going to let him talk about his story and tell you, how he used to teach language and, how he teaches it now and what the TPRS method actually is. So let's go to Blaine, and let me just get him unmuted here. 1 second. Okay, Blaine, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, you bet.
Okay, let me just make sure I've got you here. Okay. Let's say one more time, hello?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay, great. Hey, how are you doing?
Good.
So could you first start by telling us, when did you decide to become a teacher?
Oh, well, I coached a little baseball team when I was in high school, when I was 16, and loved working with kids, and so I decided then I was going to be a teacher.
And did you immediately start teaching language? Because you were a Spanish teacher, is that right?
Yeah, right. I went on an LDS church mission, and I lived in Chile for 2 years when I was 19. And it was after I got back, then I learned Spanish down there, and so I already knew Spanish, and so that's when I decided, after that, I decided to be a Spanish teacher.
I see. What was it like when you first started, your first year of teaching?
Well, I had about 5 years of a very difficult start, and I didn't know how to teach, and I felt like I really hadn't been trained how to teach. And so I tried different things, but nothing really worked. And the biggest problem was it didn't matter what I did or how I did it, students, it didn't stick. There was just no long-term memory. And so it was a very frustrating experience. I went in 3 different schools in 4 years. One school, they didn't offer me a contract back. And I went to another school, and And they told me at the third school, there was only 31 kids in the whole Spanish program and the school of 900. And the principal told me one day, if you don't get more students in your class, you're not going to teach here. So I was just struggling to even be successful as a teacher at all, and nothing I did seemed to work.
So what inspired you to change and to this method? You know, what inspired that in the very beginning?
But what really inspired it was just to try to keep my job. But at first, I'd heard just one sentence about this way of teaching with commands in college. And so the year was 1980, and I'd been teaching for 5 years. And I found a book written by James Asher called Learning Another Language Through Action. And so I went in and started teaching with commands to my class, and just totally a radical different way of teaching from what I'd done before. And I just told them stand up and sit down, and I just modeled the command, and I just kept doing more and more of that. And boy, that really worked. I had a girl that had been in my class for 1 year, and she went to Costa Rica for 6 months. So after 6 months, she came back, and by then I'd been teaching with commands for 3 months. And I told her, I said, Tammy, you've got to see this new way of teaching. And so she came into the class the first day, and I turned the class over to the kids, and they gave her commands for a whole hour, no English at all. And at the end of the class, I said, what did you think about that? And she said, that's the most amazing thing I've ever seen. That those kids learned more Spanish in 3 months of your class than I learned in 3 months of living in Costa Rica. So I really felt I'd found the way to teach language with commands. But after a while, it broke down, and there were I call it a TPR wall, and really everybody ran into this that tried TPR. You could only go so far with commands, and TPR broke down when it worked when you could model something and there was only one interpretation. But when you tried to model something or gesture something and you had multiple interpretations, then students didn't get a clear understanding. It wasn't really comprehensible. It was an attempt at comprehensible, but it was confusing input, not comprehensible input. And so that's why the TPR part of it broke down.
And so how did you then develop the idea of stories? Where did that come from? So you were using actions.
It came actually 3 years later when I read another book by Stephen Krashen, and he said language is learned by comprehensible input. And when I heard that, then I thought, oh, this is what I'm missing. And so then I took that idea of just teaching with comprehensible input and started dramatizing stories in the classroom. And then that worked better than anything I could see. And I could see even early on that my best students were leaving my class fluent in Spanish. And when I say fluent, they still had hesitation and they made errors, but they had the one thing that I didn't have after 1,000 hours of learning Spanish. They had confidence to say whatever they wanted. And it was that confidence that is the key element of fluency, and that's what teaching with stories does better than anything that I've ever found.
And how'd that make you feel as a teacher to see that big shift in your students, that confidence developing?
It just changed my whole career. I was trying to just keep my job as a teacher, and then we went from this school that we had 31 students in the whole foreign language program in this school, and in 6 years we had the highest percentage of foreign language enrollment in the state of Oregon for a school our size. They had to hire another full-time Spanish teacher, a French teacher, a Russian teacher, and a Japanese because of this new way of teaching, everybody wanted to take language.
Wow, that's fantastic. And what about now? You know, you've obviously you're not teaching in schools anymore. So can you tell me how this grew to go from you teaching in a school to now where it's international?
Yeah, well, it would have never happened except that James Asher, who was the inventor of TPR, the teaching with commands, then he published a book that I wrote, which was Look, I Can Talk, and it was just his idea of teaching stories based on TPR. And so that's how it started out. And once that book was published, Why then teachers wanted to know how to teach the book. And so that was in 1989. And after that, I just went out and started giving workshops, and little by little got known. And then about 5 years after that, 1995, then I just started my own business, and I just telling someone else this, that I started going out and then giving my own workshops, summer workshops. So I've been doing summer workshops for every year for the last 19 years. And after that, it just got more and more known, and then it just became more and more known internationally.
You've mentioned one of your students, from the past that came back from Costa Rica. Do you have any examples of students that were in your class and then went off to use the language, after being in your class? Is there one that you're particularly proud of?
Oh boy, it's a major list of kids that have written back to me 5, 10, 15, and 20 years after my class. I just recently heard from a girl, and she told me, she said, she lives in Austin, Texas. She said, I use my Spanish in my job about 30 hours a week. And she said, when people ask me where I learned Spanish, I tell them I learned it in high school. They can't believe it. They've never seen anyone that could speak Spanish that well from high school Spanish. And then she said, I probably cursed those mini cuentos that we had when I was in class. But she said, when I got out, I could see that I was fluent in Spanish. She said, now I use my Spanish in my job 30 hours a week. But I've heard from many kids and connected with them on Facebook and seen their Facebook pages where they say, I'm bilingual, or I'm a bilingual kindergarten teacher. And some of these kids, that happened 20 years ago.
Wow.
It's just been a miracle to see. And just to see the main thing that they got out of my class was fluency. They learned how to talk in class, and that's what's so different from other ways of teaching, where they teach about grammar and grammar rules. That doesn't give kids that gift of fluency. But teaching with stories, and where they learn a story and they think about the story, not about the language. That's the key that we found in learning language. The activity is so interesting. I loved your story about teaching that story in Japan and the baby and the sword. It just made me laugh.
Yeah.
But that's how you learn language. You learn it with a baby and a sword and Japan, and you just think about this story, and it just makes you laugh because it's so unusual. So who would think about a baby with a sword? So when you hear a story about that, you just think about the story, and the language process is an unconscious process. It's picking up a language. It's really how kids learn language. They don't know that. But it's absolutely what happens.
That's amazing. This method has transformed and had a huge effect on my teaching as well. And I imagine that because now you're really focused on teacher training, you probably see this with teachers too, that it not only makes these huge, wonderful changes for the students, but it transformed your career, it transformed mine. Do you see this as well with other teachers?
It was just about a year and a half ago, I was contacted by a teacher in Natal, Brazil, and she just said, we need help. She said, we don't know how to teach fluency here. And so I went down 3 times and visited their school and helped with teacher training. And every time, the results of TPRS were miraculous. And she told me, she said, we're competing with students here because we have the biggest bilingual school in our city in northern Brazil. And she said, if we don't have students, then we don't have a job here. And she said, once we've started teaching with this, she said, the principal and everybody above us, they are amazed at the success. She said, they gave me my own office here, and they bought me a smart board, and they've done all these things to promote this. And it was interesting too. The very first time I was there, I taught a class of 5th graders. And when I went back, I could just see, then I could interview those kids and just see how much they'd learned just in a few months. But she said our teachers here, they were just desperate before. And she said, this so totally changed our lives. She told me one day, she said, I thank God every day for Blaine Ray and TPRS.
That's fantastic.
It's just been amazing to see what it's done for certain people.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, I know you need to get going, so can you tell us, how can people learn more about what you're doing, get in touch with you if they want teacher training or one of your conferences, anything like that? What's the best way?
Yeah, our website is blaineraytprs.com.
blaineraytprs.com.
The number one thing, our number one book is called Fluency Through TPR Storytelling. That's available anywhere, on Amazon or at our website, or you can get that anywhere. And then other things now, we've a lot of these classes, like I told you, I taught in China and some of these different places. I've taken them and put them on YouTube. And so they can, there's a lot of things on YouTube where they can watch classes that I've taught.
Oh, fantastic. Well,
our national conference this year is in Chicago. We'll have about 200 or 300 different teachers that come from all over the world. It's a week-long training. We do that every year. And then we have about 40 summer workshops coming up this summer that we put on. That's all at our website, too.
Fantastic. BlaineRayTPRS.com. I'll put that on my Twitter account so people can see it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Blaine, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to talk to you. So nice to talk to you.
Very nice to talk to you, AJ. Thanks for asking me.
Okay, have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye for now.